So good morning, guys. You all know me, Bill Schimel, Metrolink Mortgage. We are starting off 2022. Guys, this presentation that I have, I'm going to do my very best to squeeze this inside of 10 minutes because it's really a 15-minute presentation. I've gone over it a couple of different times and tried to shorten it the best I can. But my goal today is to educate you on inflation, how inflation works, how monetary policy works, and how all of that ties into interest rates and what's going on today, what's happening with your dollar. So we're going to start off with basically a recap of 2021. So what happened in 2021? The forecast was rates were expected to begin the year and recover during the fall. What actually happened? Rates did rise sharply in the first part of the year, but Sheena, you know, because you follow some of the mortgage market, it recouped very, very quickly. We dropped back down into the twos. So that's the rates recap for last year. Housing, there was strong demand, tight supply, pushed home prices up single digits is what their forecast was, a single digit appreciation. What really happened? COVID. COVID hit in 2021. We had such little supply, so much demand, supply chain issues. We had all kinds of things happening. We wound up seeing double digit appreciation, 19% in some parts of this metro area. Pretty incredible. So that was kind of the recap of 2021. So 2022, the Fed's going to play a major role in 2022. So we're going to be looking at rate hikes. The Fed funds rate, in case you guys don't know what the Fed funds rate is, that is what the Federal Reserve lends money to banks so they can turn around and lend it to you. Currently, the Fed funds rate is at 0. Okay? What that means is the banks can start lending money cheaper to boost the economy.
Is that tapering or tampering?
Tapering. So what Fed has started tapering already. They started tapering last November. What tapering means is they're slowing down their purchase of mortgage-backed security bonds. Our interest rate market has been propped up by the Federal Reserve for quite some time now. They've been purchasing mortgage-backed securities and treasury bonds for quite some time. So the tapering, rate hikes, and balance sheet runoff, what balance sheet runoff means, so those investments that they make, they continually roll off. They take that money and they reinvest it again. They're slowing all that down. That's the tapering. But all of this stuff can basically impact our equity markets coming up. So this is how the Fed is built up. There's 19 total Fed members. 12 of them can vote. They rotate out every year, so the monetary policy shifts as those guys move. Okay? Fighting inflation is going to be their main focus in 2022. Then there will be, and I can promise you this, and Kylie will back me up, there will be negative stock market reaction to this when it starts to happen, okay?
It's down 8% this year already in the NASDAQ.
Yep, that's well, I got 7 in my numbers, but you're right, okay? Fed should have
dying today, so it'll do it.
The Fed should have done this sooner. The Fed should have hiked the Fed's fund rate. Again, it's not attached to mortgage rates. This is about monetary policy. They should have hiked this rate a while ago, and they haven't. So now they're... So what I'm about to jump into right now is history. I'm going to give a small history lesson. Sorry if it bores you a little bit, but I want to show you the patterns that have happened over the past 40 years or so, and this will make a lot of sense to you when I come to the end. So first guy we're going to talk about is Arthur Burns. He was the Fed chair back in the 70s. This guy was a nitwit. He ignored inflation completely. He kept calling it transitory. Has anybody heard the word transitory on the news? Okay, I got one person paying attention. What transitory means is it's short-lived, okay? It's only supposed to be a short period of time. If you hear a Fed member or a Fed chair say something is transitory, believe the direct opposite because they really don't know what they're talking about, okay? So far, sorry about that. He ignored inflation completely, okay? It was rapidly rising. He insisted it would be transitory, it really wouldn't. In that case, so year-over-year inflation went from 7% to 14%, if you can believe that. It doubled back in that time, in 2 years. It doubled in that time.
24% on a house in the 80s.
Yep.
24%.
Where's inflation right now?
Yeah, I'll get to that. So look what happened also, guys. So inflation directly correlates to mortgage rates. You can see mortgage rates went from 12 to 18%. Most of you in here are probably not even paying 18% on your credit card. And there was mortgage rates back at that time that were as high as 18%. All right, so let's talk about Paul Volcker. Okay, he was the Fed chair in the 80s. They got the same kind of problems. They had inflation. We had inflation go from 11% to 20% in 2 years. Okay, I'm sorry. He hiked the Fed rate from 11% to 20%. So you can only imagine what those banks were having to charge for interest rates back then if the Fed funds rate was that high. We won't go there. All right. So anyway, but when Volcker did that, though, inflation dropped from 14% down to 5%. Okay. And because the inflation dropped like that, we saw Burns' 18% mortgage rate fiasco drop down to 12%. So that was really, really, at least it showed that monetary policy was making something work. But guys, when stuff like this happens, there are consequences, okay? When Volcker did this, the S&P 500 market dropped by 30%, okay? So you see the tug and pull here on how monetary policy works so far? There's always going to be, when these guys do something, there's going to be some kind of consequences, okay? The good consequences that realtors, mortgage people have had so far is the Feds have been artificially keeping the rates down. This is going to change, and it's going to change in a big way. Okay, Alan Greenspan, you guys probably remember this guy. This is a little more recent. He was part of our mortgage crash back in 2008, but he was a Fed chair for quite some time. Inflation doubled on his watch from 1.75 to 3.5%. Higher inflation caused mortgage rates. Now back then were from 7 to 8.5% is where they went up. But Greenspan did take action quickly, and he raised the Fed funds rate by 1.75. So it basically matching the inflation, and it went from 4.7 to 6.5% that year. Okay. Inflation responded, dropped from 3.5 to 1% for their inflationary rate. So that was really getting that under control because we hadn't seen that. If you just saw the past couple slides, you've seen it finally come down to a reasonable rate, right? All right. So and then of course the mortgage rates dropped from 8.5 to about 5.5. Started a big refinance boom. I won't get into the whole crash of 2000 things, but again, there were consequences. Okay. When he did this, the S&P 500 dropped by 50% in 6 months. 6 months, that index dropped. Okay, so are you guys starting to see a pattern here? A little bit, maybe? All right, so today we have Mr. Jerome Powell, okay? 2021 inflation increased 1.75% to 7% year over year. Again, this guy said transitory. You keep hearing this, transitory. It's only going to be short-lived. It has not been short-lived, okay? Fed is currently tapering their purchase of mortgage-backed securities and treasuries. They're not hiking the Fed funds rate yet. They can't do both at the same time. It's like trying to light a cigarette and shake a gasoline can at the same time. It's bad juju. You don't want to do that. So the Fed is targeting 3 rate hikes in 2022 and 2 to 3 more in 2023. Inflation rates right now can still rise. They have not. As a matter of fact, we were seeing interest rates rise right now. We're close to 4% in some places. So what I want to do now, did I go backwards? There it goes, okay. All right, so I'm going to recap this real quick. So we got all these 3 nitwits here. And I already went over their inflation numbers, right? So we went to that. So this is what the mortgage rates look like with them on the watch and what inflation was doing. And you take a look at what they did to the Fed funds rate, okay? See, Volcker and Burns both made it from 11% to 20%. They're raising that Fed funds rate. 4.75 to 6.5 for Greenspan. 2022 right now, it's still at 0. They plan on raising that Fed funds rate, but when, okay? Here's the recap on the inflation response. 14.5 down to 5% when they raised the Fed funds rate. Same thing happened with Greenspan, lower numbers, but it still worked. So technically, with Jerome Powell, when they do these things, it should drop.
Like should drop?
Should. If history repeats itself and they start raising that Fed funds rate, it should taper inflation, and we should see the inflationary numbers come down. Okay? And let's compare it to mortgage rates. Remember, 18 down to 12% when they did this, 8.5 down to 5.5. Should decline interest rates towards the fall here. We've already raised up. We've gone up over 1.25, probably in the past 5 or 6 months in interest rate.
Drop back below 3 this year, right?
Yep. My prediction is probably come closer to about 3%, give or take, depending on where you're at later on this year, if they stick to the monetary policy. But again, guys, there was consequences each and every time something like this happened, okay? S&P down 30%, we wound up sliding into a recession back then in the 70s and early 80s. With Greenspan, the exact same thing happened. When that index fell like that, we slipped into a recession. Stocks are super expensive, and that market is overvalued right now. Again, showing recessionary signs. So, a couple of wild cards that can play in this thing. COVID, nobody knows what's going on with COVID right now. Nobody can get a steady policy. Nobody has any idea we don't even know if another variant is going to show. So if another variant shows up, does it cut our supply chains again? What happens? Okay, additional stimulus. What if some additional stimulus comes out? Okay, that's going to fan the flames to inflation because the government's going to give people more money to go out and spend. If people are spending more money, it's going to inflate the economy, right? All right, runoff of the Fed's balance sheet. I won't go too much into this, but basically I talked about a couple of minutes ago. The Feds purchase these mortgage-backed securities, they roll off their balance sheet, and they take that and they reinvest it back in, and that's how they're keeping things there. We're not so sure if they're going to continue to do that. Again, they're not going to do two things at the same time. They're not going to stop the roll-off and hike the rates at the same time. I think they're going to hike the rates probably in May, maybe June. So let's talk about stock market forecast. Here we are. Super, super overvalued right now. They're expensive. Price-to-earning multiples can contract here really, really easy. Rate hikes could absolutely do that. In my estimation, I think the stock market in 2022 is probably going to decline by about 10%. Could be more throughout 2022. So if we were to tally it up in 2022,
What's your worst case scenario?
you want to know that. All right, so here's my interest rate forecast. Right now we're sitting at about 3 3/4. Some shops are at 4%. I think we're going to continue to rise with that. With the Fed action, the slowing economy conditions, interest rates should head lower, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, but we'll see how the Fed monetary policy takes hold. If the rate hikes do tamper down the inflation, I think we're going to be in good shape. Okay? What this means for somebody like me in a forecast, if I'm refinancing somebody today, I don't want to charge them too many closing costs because I might have another opportunity to refinance them in the future. And if we can limit their costs, it makes sense for them to refinance again if rates come down. Same thing on a purchase too.
3 is a big jump down.
Yeah. So on a purchase, for example, I would want to charge them the least amount of closing costs that I can because I'm predicting that interest rates are going to come down. I have an opportunity to refinance them. Okay. All right, so housing market forecast. I think it's going to remain very, very strong in 2022, but COVID's the wild card. COVID's the player. We really don't know what may happen there. Supply is going to increase, but still remain tight. Labor, supply, all of these things have shortages. Chip shortages are still a really big problem, so it's slowing things down. And rents will continue to rise. Over 5%, yeah. Some of you that are renting have seen it traditionally. 11%. I've seen it's 17 or 18% in Miami, by the way. So if you want sunshine, it's going to cost you. And so my forecast right now is like mid to single digits in home appreciation for the year in 2022. But if we have some of the same issues as we did in 2021, it would not surprise me a single bit if we hit 12 or 13% in appreciation. That is what I got, guys. Woo!